Okay, I think we're ready to go. So thank you all for joining us for today's event, The Nature of Health, to look at how nature can benefit our health, particularly during these often difficult times of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Our conservation mission has never been timelier. Nature is a lifeline for so many people as we all find ways to cope. So we hope this helps you with that. My name is Christine Chilton. I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Nature Conservancy of Canada here in Manitoba, and I'm happy to be your moderator today. I'd like to start by stating that we at the Nature Conservancy of Canada respectfully acknowledge that the work that we do across the country is on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, both past and present. For millennia, they've worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and take the time to acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous people in Canada today. The Nature Conservancy of Canada is a national charity and Canada's leading not-for-profit private land conservation organization, working to protect our most important natural areas and the species they sustain. Since 1962, NCC and our partners have helped to protect 14 million hectares, which is 35 million acres, coast to coast to coast. To learn more, we encourage you to visit our website, www.natureconservancy.ca. Today, we'll be joined by Dr. David Walker, Assistant Professor with the University of Manitoba, Lindsey Summers, a community organizer in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and Kevin Snike, Regional Vice President for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, right here in, you guessed it, Manitoba. So before we begin the webinar, I'd like to quickly cover a few housekeeping topics. Just take a minute here. As we're being joined by people from across the province and country, you may experience a temporary glitch during the event. So we thank you in advance for your patience on that. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be sharing a link to the recording after the event, so keep your eyes on your inboxes. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues, friends, and family. We also invite your comments and questions. You will notice a chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there, include who the question is intended for, and we will answer them all at the end of the webinar. At this time, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. David Walker from the University of Manitoba. David is a biologist and environmental scientist with over 20 years of experience in field-based environmental education. He is a core faculty member in the Environmental Science and Studies program at the University of Manitoba. He teaches in the wildlife and geomatics focus areas, promoting experiential learning in the environment. He is currently working on a nature-based program promoting health and well-being in the elderly. The floor is all yours, David.
All right, thank you very much, Christine. I will have to now screen share. And so, 1 second, please, as I attempt. Whoops, that's not the start. There we go. Yeah, thanks again, Christine. I'll be talking a little bit today about nature and health and nature experiences for health and well-being. And thank you very much for your introduction. I'll just give a little bit more background on what it is that we do. Of course, I'm a professor in the Clayton H. Riddell Faculty of Environment, Earth and Resources, working in wildlife, education and research. And we don't do this alone. We have lots of partners like the NCC. And so I'll mention some of those partners as I describe the program. We've worked with wildlife rehabilitation and recovery. The photo that you see on this slide is Robert and Nancy Wielden that run Parkland Muse, which is a peregrine falconry education and research center just south of the city of Winnipeg. The person in the center of the photo is Dr. Rick Badak, who is responsible for many of the programs. He's been a pioneer in science-based environmental education here at the University of Manitoba, and we couldn't really have done any of these things without his guidance. So rehabilitation, recovery of wildlife, fisheries. We take students out on the ice and they learn about commercial fishing from actual private fishermen. Wildlife health. the late Vince Crichton would come in, and we hope that there'll be others that will now take over his role of working with our students to teach them about wildlife health. So in this case, he's doing a necropsy on a roadkill deer, an animal that would otherwise be disposed of, but of course, our students get a chance to learn about the diseases in wildlife through his guidance. Waterfowl Management. We have our students involved with a number of agencies like Delta Waterfowl, Ducks Unlimited. We actually have a student chapter, an activist chapter in for DU here in the faculty. They learn all elements of wildlife biology in the field. We also do a lot of environmental outreach. Many of the partners that we work with, including NCC, Delta Waterfowl, and so forth, our students actually go to fundraisers and help raise money for those organizations and the important work that they do. And of course, we do a lot of student field research at the graduate and at the undergraduate levels. And so this is a silhouette of one of my students working with waterfowl, doing a drone-based survey using thermal drones in the late evening, early morning. Common theme to all this is that nature experience is critical to learning. But what does that actually have to do with health? Well, it turns out there is a very strong relationship between health and nature. And in fact, learning in nature is also a healthy way of learning. So what does nature provide from a health perspective? Well, many of us, when we think about going outside, we think of exercise and the experiences that we have. So perhaps going canoeing, as you see in the top photo, this is a photo taken at the end of a portage, or going out and just experiencing something new. These are some colleagues in the bottom photo taking pictures at the Spirit Sands Trails. These are colleagues from Uganda, Macquarie University in Uganda, out and experiencing nature in Manitoba for the first time. We also often think of foods and medicines, berry picking, and other kinds of sources of foods. A photo of the collection of fiddleheads in the spring, and also medicines. Nature provides us with many medicines, and this is a photo of a traditional healer, again in Uganda, in the Buhoma region, explaining how the various plants were used in that area to treat a medicine, or treat people who are sick with various medicines. And we often think of those as nature. What we don't necessarily think of as much is the cognitive development benefits that nature provides and the mental health benefits that nature provides. And although it's been recognized on some level for millennia, it's really been more recent that it's starting to be examined in a fuller way by science. And so going out in nature allows, especially children, to develop cognitively. The kind of unscheduled, uncontained play and building forts, for instance, is a unique experience that we can't get on the soccer field, although soccer is a great opportunity for exercise for children. Or just sitting in nature and allowing nature to heal us. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later in a further presentation. I think the public became more aware of the role of nature in cognitive development and overall mental health as a result of some popular books written by Richard Louv. The first book, Last Child in the Woods, dealt with nature deficit disorder and the connection that the author made between things like attention deficit and the fact that perhaps people are not being, especially children, they're not being stimulated in a way that is conducive to learning. Being in a classroom in a controlled environment doesn't allow for the cognitive development that you get from nature. And so he coined that term, nature deficit disorder. And there have been a number of initiatives that have started as a result of that. So the Children Nature Network and others that will help you if you're a parent and want to get your child more out into nature, the kinds of activities that you might want to take part in. And then Richard followed up with another book, The Nature Principle, which is a more philosophical treatment of nature and its benefits to humans. And he identified several key areas. So the value of nature in engendering creativity and imagination, wellness, and what he called vitamin N for nature, that nature, in a sense, nourishes us in the same way that vitamins in our diet do. The importance of place-based learning, that much of our learning has been evolved in place. And so that experience of place-based learning is really essential. Creating Eden, how activities on the landscape like gardening can improve cognitive functioning and overall health. And of course, spirituality and ethics as important elements of it. Now, an earlier version of this talk had in part the title Prescribing Nature, which is, I think, an okay title, but nature in some sense isn't prescribed in the same way drugs are. You go to get a prescription from a doctor because it's too dangerous perhaps to self-medicate, and you have to get that drug from behind the counter. Well, there is no counter with nature, and you don't have to be prescribed. You can go out and enjoy it at any time that you want. But what are some of the nature experiences that people need or perhaps most often practice? Well, community gardens. In fact, gardening in general is one of the most common way people connect with nature. In fact, I don't have stats for Canada, but up to 40% of people in the UK and about a third of the people in the US have gardens and are active in gardening. And of course, we've seen gardens in the news. Growing concerns, a recent article in the Free Press about how community gardens are likely benefiting from increased activity during the pandemic. Or the fact that the city ran out of some of its allotment garden spaces fairly early this year, in fact, early April. Or in fact, how some city councilors want to build community garden space into future development within the city. And really, this is important because most of the gardens that we have that are community gardens that are not on private property are in some sense controlled or at least available through the city. And there's two types: the allotment gardens where you directly rent from the city, or community gardens that are run by separate organizations, but they often lease their land from the city. So that green space is really quite important. An example of one of these gardens is the one at Place St. Norbert, just south of the perimeter. It's an active community garden, and I took a photo of the other day, and people are out planting even as we speak. So gardening and health. Although there's lots of ways that you can get healthy by being in nature, gardening is very beneficial. And in fact, there was a meta-analysis study. A meta-analysis is a kind of a study that uses as its source a whole host of other studies to determine whether or not something is proven, in quotes, to be to work or to be successful. And so this particular study included 22 case studies and 76 comparisons, and they found that there were significant positive health effects across a whole host of measurements in depression, in other psychological issues, in body health and shape and so forth. And in fact, they concluded their study by saying a regular dose of gardening can improve public health. And there's also a lot of results from studies in the elderly that are also encouraging in this regard. And that's one of the connections that I'm making right now with Dr. Susie Santos, who is a scientist that and coordinator of a number of different programs, but in particular is working with the Residence d'Espin and Villa Olno in St. Boniface. These are independent living facilities. They promote healthy and stimulating ways of life, and they're developing an outdoor program of nature education, and one of those activities is gardening. And so it's really the application of that nature principle, creating Eden, getting vitamin N for wellness, but doing it in the elderly to try to support and reverse perhaps, or at least delay cognitive decline. And that's one of the things we'll be studying, is how does this improve the overall health and perhaps even delay cognitive decline. And really it's only COVID that is slowing down that project this particular year. I think it's also important in concluding this to make the connection that nature is important for our health, but healthy nature is important as well. And one of the connections, if you need to have a natural landscape to improve your health, then you need to make sure that those natural landscapes are healthy. And you know, we see deforestation, we see habitat loss, we see other kinds of environmental degradation from vehicles, from strip mining, from practices that allow riverbanks to slump into rivers and so forth. And these are all very damaging to a healthy environment. So organizations like the NCC, whose goal and role is to try to protect environments, is essential ultimately for our health, because a healthy natural environment means a healthy human environment. And so we'd like to see a lot more of this than what we saw on those previous images. So I'd like to say thanks very much for listening to me this morning. Christine, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that, folks. Thank you, David. We really want to take the time to thank you for your time this morning and sharing your knowledge and experience on nature's direct influence on our health and well-being. Our next speaker today is Lindsey Summers, community organizer here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Lindsey has over 15 years of experience in coaching, communications, community engagement, and program development. She connects people to the city through her programs, Learn to Run, Learn to Skate, Learn to Bike, and Brown Bag Bocce Ball, and can even manage to bring people outside for curling draws at -40 degrees in the heart of the Exchange District. We would like to give you just a heads up to some of our viewers that Lindsey will be speaking to the topics of grief and loss, and this may be difficult for you. So whenever you're ready, Lindsey.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. There we go. Bye. There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here today to share with you my story about how spending time in nature has helped me cope with loss, build resilience, and inspire me to help people connect to urban nature through movement. So today my story begins in 2013. I was a personal trainer and worked with people inside my studio. I loved helping people find connections to their body through movement. I was inspired by my own experiences growing up. I played team sports and was always outside being recreationally active, and honestly mostly saw physical activity as just play. So it wasn't a total surprise in 2013 when my 60-year-old mother decided to just take up running. She decided to run 10K with me at the Manitoba Marathon. And so she would train along River Road in St. Andrews, doing run walk segments with the hydro poles, working her way up to 10K. But when she would get home from her run, then she'd get in her car and then she'd look on the odometer to see how far she ran. She spent the spring of 2013 training all along the Red River. Like thousands of others, we lined up on Father's Day at the Manitoba Marathon to run our 10K. It felt great. It was a huge accomplishment for her. 28 days after our run, everything changed. A seemingly innocent, numb feeling in her foot revealed a terminal brain tumor. That news is never not shocking. Getting a cancer diagnosis is unfortunately all too common, and if you have a chance, you get to fight it. But if it's a terminal diagnosis, you know that it's going to end and there's a timeline. I can't imagine what that was like for my mom, and I don't really know, but I know how she continued to be my mom and literally walk me through her terminal illness. Her process involved continuing her walks down River Road that summer. One common stop along the way was the Captain Kennedy Tea House with this amazing flower garden. Walking up and down the rows, we'd admire the colors, the shapes, the smells. Looking at the beauty and the magnificence of the nature was something she had always stopped and noticed. "Isn't this incredible?" she'd always say. She found peace in nature and was comforted by its beauty. I too began to feel small moments of peace and comfort. I was very privileged to spend 2 afternoons a week with my mom. We went for a lot of walks up and down River Road in all weather, in all seasons. She would always ask me to stop and take photos of the things that we'd see. Eventually, as expected, she was in a wheelchair, so I began pushing her up and down River Road, and sometimes I'd even pick up the pace, and so I feel like she was running again. It was so beautiful and peaceful. One of the other side effects of her brain tumor was her difficulty in tracking conversation and quantitative processing. But the other part of her brain was still very much alive. She could see the visuals. We had so many conversations about the glowing sunset, how the brilliance of the color of a leaf, or the sounds of the birds, and how beautiful the reflections on the river were. There was one tree along River Road that she always loved its shape. Look at it, it's so perfectly round. In every season, the tree would catch her eye. We'd have to stop and spend some time to admire it. I have a lot of pictures of this tree. Its leaves were always interesting. The bright neon buds in spring, the explosive canopy in the summer, the brilliance of the changing colors in the fall, and then the perfectly rounded sculptural skeleton in the winter. It survived and it thrived. No matter what weather was thrown at it, it was there, firmly rooted in the ground. Our last walk along River Road was a crisp day at the end of October. She insisted on bundling up and heading out the door, escaping her hospital bed in the dining room and seeing the world beyond sickness. We walked 10K round trip for Skinner's for ice cream. Being outside meant freedom. In the end, she lived with the tumor for over 3 years. Our walks both brought us immense peace and comfort. Bearing witness to the life cycles of nature was calming and reassuring. It kept us present. It slowed down time. It was the one constant we could trust. I'm not a religious person, but there was something bigger than us in nature. We are living and dying biology too. It was comforting to know we're all part of the same cycle. I found such rooting and grounding in the simple act of noticing nature. It's the opposite of being distracted. I am so grateful that we were able to slow down time for those 3 years. We built connections beyond conversation. Now this tree becomes a place that we can go and connect to with my mom. On her birthday, we walk there and we have a toast with champagne. And yes, we even give the tree a little swig too. It stands strong. It helps me understand that we all live and die through the seasons when we just spend it one day at a time. I feel very fortunate to feel such peace and comfort in nature through her sickness. Terminal illness is awful, as anyone knows. The only place we could remotely relieve that was in nature. It stayed with me, and I continue to connect with her through nature. Looking back at the last year, I know I have 100% completely relied on nature to help me cope with the losses and changes that feel so very much out of our control. No matter what chaos surrounds me, I trust nature to bring me to a present moment. It is an incredible power. Spending time with my mom was such a gift. I have a full bank of memories and moments to cherish. I wanted to continue moving outside with her inspiration, so I started a different kind of running club. I loved how my mom loved to run. She ran 100% for the experience of running. It was never about watching a clock or hitting a goal of a time. She ran to see the world around her. So in the spring of 2017, I developed a Learn to Run program inspired by her. I wanted people to get out and move, explore the city, and see urban nature. I taught people how to run, not using hydro poles like her method, but using along the same river, using bridges and architecture and natural elements to cue people for the running and walk segments. I asked people to look up and notice what's around them. Coincidentally, we often meet nearby the Nature Conservancy Prairie Garden at the Forks to run. In our 8-week session, we can experience so much change. We see the barren start in early April that surely blooms into lush green by the end of May. Week by week, we notice those changes and we endure all the weather. The program grew and I added fall and winter sessions. We run riverside, exploring all the paths and experience urban nature in all seasons. We bear witness to its changes. We run in -40 on the frozen river with only the sounds of the incredible, unmistakable snow crunch under our feet. We dodge the puddles in the spring and we run under the brilliant fall colors. It is a gift to have these two rivers converge right here in the middle of our downtown. They hold so much life. I believe we can slow time down by witnessing the change of seasons. I encourage people to run outside, be present, and connect to the larger world around us. I am so grateful that I get to continue to share this perspective and lens into running. We're a very relaxed running group. We don't train for time or distance. We simply run to notice the world around us. especially during this last year. It's been so abundantly clear that nature heals us. When you stop and really notice the incremental changes of what's happening right around us, it brings us to a present moment when it feels like everything else is out of control. Nature is powerful. It truly roots us and can hold us when life gets really hard. It shows us that seasons change, time passes, but our roots are still here. Thank you. Am I muted?
No, you're perfect.
Oh, okay. It looked like I had a little thing on the end. I was like, did I just do that whole thing and no one heard me? Okay, I'll stop my screen share now.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was great, and we're so grateful for you for your time today and sharing such a personal story that connects us with nature and how it's impacted your daily experiences. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Do I have to do anything? Did it all work?
It all worked. It was great.
Okay.
Our final speaker today is Kevin Tanaik. Kevin holds the position of Regional Vice President for the Nature Conservancy of Canada's Manitoba region. He has overseen the delivery of NCC's conservation programming in the region since 2008. Kevin has more than 18 years of experience in developing and delivering biodiversity conservation programming. Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Christine, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm here to speak a little bit about Nature Conservancy Canada's work in implementing on-the-ground conservation work that benefits nature and people. Nature Conservancy Canada is known as a leader in conservation. Our robust conservation science planning facilitates the conservation of some of the most highly threatened and high biodiversity lands across the country. And our timely long-term stewardship work takes care of these properties for future generations. What may be less prominent is our work in connecting Canadians to nature and our growing recognition that Nature Conservancy Canada's work helps deliver nature benefits to Canadians and our communities. Nature's benefits are the goods and services that people obtain from nature. These include benefits that directly affect all people and can be categorized as provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural benefits. I'll describe these in a little more detail shortly. Well, some of these benefits are essential for life. Others act to enrich our well-being. And it's often underappreciated that the richness and integrity of biodiversity underlies all of nature's benefits. When we lose nature, we also lose the benefit that nature provides to people. These benefits range from carbon sequestration to the mental and physical health benefits of spending time in nature. While reversing the loss of biodiversity remains core to Nature Conservancy Canada's mission, we acknowledge that people are an essential part of our conservation story. Natural systems around the world are rapidly changing as a result of human activity. And while people have long influenced species and ecosystems at local and regional levels, we're now seeing that our activities have impacts at the global scale. And these impacts include the twin crisis of biodiversity loss and climate change, but also threats to water and food security, air pollution, degrading water quality, increased risk of flooding, and soil loss. In addition, there's growing evidence that the loss of our connection to nature impacts our personal health and well-being. As mentioned previously, the benefits which nature can provide can be divided into four groups. First one, regulating. These are the benefits that maintain the quality of our environment. They include things like carbon sequestration, flood prevention, and pollination services. These benefits are often invisible and most often taken for granted until they're degraded. Many of the benefits that our Nature Conservancy Canada projects provide are in this group. Provisioning. These are the material benefits that people obtain from nature, such as water and other material goods. Food productions, such as that provided by cattle production or ranching, are common examples of provisioning benefits some of our properties provide. Cultural. These are the non-material benefits people obtain from nature. They include a cultural identity, sense of place, and spiritual experiences. Opportunities for tourism, recreation, and employment are also included in this group. Cultural benefits are among the most important values that people often associate with nature. Finally, supporting. This is our traditional work at Nature Conservancy Canada to conserve biodiversity. Conserving and restoring the health and diversity of ecosystems, species, genetic variability creates a resilient environment, and that is the foundation of all the benefits that nature provides. These categories of nature's benefits are deeply connected For example, ranching on native grasslands supports food production, but is also a way of life and an identity for many. That's why Nature Conservancy Canada has begun to include human well-being targets into our conservation planning. Our Assiniboine Delta natural area, which is in an area in central Manitoba, was the first in Manitoba to include a human well-being target. While we recognize the importance of the health of the area's near surface aquifer, not only to support biodiversity, it is also important to the local communities and economy of the region. Additionally, in our conservation plan that supports the community pasture lands in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, human well-being targets are nearly equal focus to our biodiversity targets. Strategy and goals include supporting sustainable ranching industry and rural livelihoods, as well as consideration of the importance that natural spaces to the historic, cultural, and rural identity of the people living and working in the landscapes that we seek to conserve. Nature Conservancy Canada also facilitates access to nature. These include our nature destination properties that typically have designated recreational trails and interpretive signage to help people learn more about the surrounding habitats. In a normal year, this would also include our conservation volunteer program, and experiential classroom programs that offer opportunities and programming to directly connect and learn about nature. It is worth noting that the mental health benefits of nature conservation have not been evenly distributed. Although many of Nature Conservancy Canada's conservation projects exist in rural landscapes, projects like Nature Conservancy's Prairie Fork Garden offer an urban connection to Manitoba's tallgrass prairie, right in the heart of Winnipeg. The 20,000 square foot prairie garden offers green space to discover the native grasses and plants that residents in southeastern Manitoba have right in their backyards. And we're also happy to say that the Prairie Forks Garden is a common meeting place for Lindsey's events. We're also learning the importance of connecting to nature is now more important than ever as we continue to live the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent Ipsos poll conducted on behalf of Nature Conservancy Canada revealed that 94% of Canadians acknowledge that nature has helped them relieve stress or anxiety. 86% of Canadians agree that spending time in nature is important to support their mental health during COVID-19. And 3/4 of Canadians agreed that spending time in nature is important to them now more than ever, given the pandemic. As summer is quickly upon us, we encourage you to connect with nature, and whether that's on your balcony, in your backyard, or safely at your local green space. We want to let you know that Nature Conservancy Canada is also open. Please check our property access page and connect with your local and closest Nature Conservancy Canada office to ensure that a place or a property is open to visitors. In closing, when nature thrives, we all thrive. By protecting nature, we're also protecting the benefits that nature provides to people. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, for sharing how NCC's conservation work benefits both nature and people. So we have a couple of questions for the speakers that have been submitted, but as a reminder, if you have a question that you have not yet submitted, please enter it using the chat box feature and let us know who the question is for, and we'll get through as many as time allows. So for the first question, Lindsey, how do you address some of the greatest barriers to connecting to nature in Manitoba? I'm guessing that's a weather question or maybe a mosquito question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I have a hilarious YouTube video that I did with the forks about layering. It is about education and layering, and one of my catchphrases is, it's never fun when you're cold, so never be cold, dress properly for it. So in winter in Manitoba, I wish that everyone would get a pair of smart wool socks to start. Merino wool socks will always keep your feet warm. That base layer, just the proper way to layer to get outside, is really important for Manitoba winters. I think that's really the barrier for people in Manitoba, I think, is the winter time. Does that
That's great.
Was
Yeah.
that the question? Does that answer that?
It sure does, yeah.
But yeah, and I guess actually to be really clear, there are, if you are being physically active and sweating, you want to pay attention to the different materials that you're putting on your body. Cotton is a really bad thing to put on. You want to put in that synthetic fiber because it's not fun when you're cold.
I've seen the video. It inspired me. I layered. And I'm still looking for a one-piece snowsuit.
Yeah, they're the best.
David, some people link nature as sort of a cure-all to health benefits. How do you address that?
Okay, well, first, I'd like to say I'm glad I didn't follow Lindsey because that was a very inspiring talk. So I'm glad I went first. Yeah, I think one of the challenges to recognize is that a lot of people just link natural products with health, and of course they can be, but they're not a cure-all. So I think you need to make sure that if you have some kind of a medical condition, that you're getting treated for that medical condition, and nature can certainly be of benefit to you as part of both emotional as well as healing. But it's really critical that you also follow through on all of your doctor's actual prescriptions as well. Because there's lots of things in nature that are not good for you. Arsenic is natural, cyanide is natural, and nature does produce poisons. They've evolved for important reasons. Most plants don't want to be eaten. So the reality is, you have to be cautious when you do go out and taste nature literally, and you also do have to make sure that you follow through on your regular treatments as well.
Great, thank you. Kevin, how can people help with the Nature Conservancy of Canada?
Get involved. When there are opportunities, attending our kind of virtual events like this right here is a fantastic way to learn more and open yourself up for opportunities. Certainly in better times, less restrictive times, taking advantage of some of the opportunities for organized events, like some of our engagement or conservation volunteer events, and then take it upon yourself. Just get outside and enjoy nature whenever and wherever you can. Again, Nature Conservancy Canada's properties are generally open for public access. Contacting a local NCC office and finding out where some of these properties are and how to get to them is an easy way to get introduced to some of the assets that NCC has. And yes, get involved, get out, whether it's taking a run down a river walk or taking the effort to get outside of a town and visit an NCC property. That's the best way.
Perfect, thank you. How do we convince City of Winnipeg administration that we can't afford to build infill at the expense of all green spaces in the city? David, do you want to try? Lindsey?
Well, that's a how do we convince the
toughie.
City of Winnipeg to do anything? Actually, I guess is the broader question. There's so many elements to infill that are challenging. I mean, there's lots of places where there's older homes that are getting torn down for infill, and we're replacing, in some instances, affordable housing with less affordable housing, and so there's that element too, in terms of addressing poverty in the city. And so there's a number of other facets beyond just the loss of green space. I think the idea to encourage development or redevelopment of already developed areas, as long as we also allow for lower cost housing, is probably a better solution than just filling in all of our green space with buildings. There certainly is an environmental advantage for densification. We spread out, and if we create more green space as we spread out, that's great, but that spread out also has environmental impacts. So densification is the way to go. It just needs to be done in a respectful and I think well thought out way.
Great, thank you. Lindsey, how do we get people to connect nature with how they're feeling?
Well, that really starts with self-awareness, I think, to be honest. And I think breath is a tool that we don't use enough. And so just to get outside and just take 3 to 5 deep breaths and just let those shoulders relax, clear the head, and just create some space to acknowledge that. And I also think that these are really hard times. Like when I say resiliency, I truly mean resiliency, that like it's not easy, and to go easy on ourselves and to say, okay, how am I feeling right now? What do I need right now? I just need to step outside and feel the sun on my skin for 2 minutes. Then I'm going to come back inside and finish that email. And just understanding that, you know, it literally can take 30 seconds and some deep breaths, and that will bring you back to center. But it is a practice, and it does take discipline. So I just think starting really, really small and finding those tiny, tiny opportunities to admire a flower, to see the reflection, to, you know, all of our senses, you know, it takes seconds.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. So that's all we have for questions for today. If you have something else that you'd like to ask any of our panelists, or a topic request you have for a future webinar, please reach out to us. You can just shoot us an email at manitoba@natureconservancy.ca, and we will get back to you promptly. Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's webinar. David, Lindsey, Kevin, thank you all for sharing your insights and expertise. For updates on future webinars and events in your area, check out our events page at natureconservancy.ca/events. And if you'd like to learn more about NCC's nature destinations, a QR code is on the screen. You just scan it with your smartphone, and you'll be taken directly to our website, or you can visit naturedestinations.ca. So please stay tuned for a link to today's webinar recording. You'll receive that in our follow-up email within the next several days. And just in closing, we wanted to mention that support for this event was provided by the Conservation Trust, which is a Manitoba Climate and Green Plan initiative delivered by the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation. So on behalf of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Please get outside and enjoy the weather. We hope to see you again next time. Thank you.